creative living, utilizing today's technology with the best of the past to bring you innovative ideas and up-to-date information for creative lifestyles in today's active world. With your host, Sheryl Borden.
Welcome to Creative Living today. We're going to learn some new ways to use fruit, including figs in beverages, and share some beautiful finishes for unlined jackets. Two of my guests are chefs, and they also serve as culinary consultants to the California Fig Advisory Board. John Sucor and Sonia Grenia are going to demonstrate the use of figs in an array of delicious and crave-worthy beverages. Figs' versatility really shines through with these delectable libations. They are with Core Food Innovations in Ashland, Virginia. My first guest is Ray Cumbie, and she's a custom dressmaker, artist, and designer. Ray's going to talk about the benefits of unlined jackets and then show some beautiful seam finishes. These include a French seam, a rolled edge seam, and bias binding using a Hong Kong finish. She is the president of the Association of Sewing and Design Professionals in Baltimore, Maryland. Ray, thank you so much for being with us today. I know you've been sewing a long time, as I have, and sometimes I think about those poor people that are just learning to sew because a pattern may say, take a 5/8 inch seam, or do a Hong Kong finish, or a flat fell seam, and I think, that's confusing if you think you have to learn all of that to start with. So how do you approach it when you're teaching?
Well, a seam is an integral part of any garment. So you want to make sure that everyone knows how to do a seam and that you do the seam that's required in the pattern. So if it says 5/8, you really need to put in 5/8 or it's not going to fit.
It's not going to fit.
And you need to read, especially if you're using an independent pattern, sometimes they actually use a 1/2 inch seam or a 1 inch seam. So you need to make sure you check the pattern and use the seam that they tell you to use.
So in other words, we should really read that guide sheet first before we start sewing.
That's exactly right.
I don't always do that, you can tell.
I understand, I know. So especially when you've been sewing a while. But when I learned to sew, there weren't sergers and there weren't a lot of seam finishes. You just made your seams and pressed them open and went on. But we now find, as the industry has more machines and they're available to home sewers, that they do make a very nice garment, and they allow the garment to last longer and to just look a little more professional, or according to what we call the industry standard, which really is a serged or finished seam pretty much everywhere in a garment.
Well, this is a great sample that you brought because you said you use this when you're teaching sewing because it has just about every type of seam finish you could imagine.
You're exactly right. An unlined jacket is so easy to make and fun. A lining just makes it much more complicated to put together. That's exactly right. But you want your unlined jacket to look neat on the inside. And I talk about this a lot with my students. So this would be actually a Hong Kong finish. It's a little binding, but it has a raw edge on the other side, so it's not that hard to put on. And it just makes that facing look perfect, doesn't it? It's just so much easier, so much prettier. And this is on the bias, that Hong Kong finish. It has to be because it's going around a curve.
And I was going to say, and it lays nice and flat.
Yes, and in order to do that, you have to cut that on the bias. This Hong Kong finish back here is on the straight of grain because it is because this is a straight line. And it doesn't need to be on the bias. You're not curving anywhere. And I just wanted to use this this salvage off of the fabric. This was a vintage piece of vintage 1980 piece of home decorator fabric, and I just thought it was so fun, and it's fun to put those little details in your garments, I think.
Only if you sew do you notice those things.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So on the sleeve here, we've actually done a binding, and the reason you do a binding on the sleeve is so on either side it looks neat. So
There's
a
no
Hong
raw
Kong
edges.
finish is raw on one side. A binding just has that second side also turned under, and I have some samples I can show you later. And then this is sort of a fake flat felt seam. We've bounded and then we've just top stitched down, which you can see on this side, for it to stay in place. And again, this just keeps the garment keeps the seams safe, and when you wash it, they don't get all rumply.
Ravelly.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Gosh, you do have a lot of different seams in this.
Yes.
Okay.
This is my little sample for my students. This is another example of a Hong Kong finish, although this is done in silk, a China silk, which is a very lightweight, almost like air. And it just makes such a beautiful edge. It doesn't add any bulk. And in this case, the quilting was done with the cotton and then the China silk underneath. So this is just a serged edge.
So it wasn't pressed open. It looks like 5/8.
That's exactly right, serged together. And then this is your Hong Kong finish here on the edges where the jacket might fly open and you want it to look particularly beautiful.
And I noticed you carried that through the hem.
Also into the hem, that's right. It keeps the hem from getting bulky with a turn under. But it also is very, yeah.
They're almost decorative.
That's exactly right.
Part of
that's
the
way
design.
I like to think of them. And then this, in a sheer or lightweight cotton, if you have a serger, you can do a rolled edge seam. And I actually stitch the seam first at whatever size it's required to be. That's right. And then I set my machine to what's called the rolled edge, which creates this thread edge that just totally encases the seam, overcasts it.
And cuts the excess fabric.
Yes, that's right. It trims the excess fabric, overcasts it, and then it also, when you're piecing a lot of fabrics together, it gives you like an outline. It's like that outline that you see when you draw a sketch. And it just allows the fabrics to be separated in a decorative sort of way.
Well, and I noticed too how lightweight it is. You don't have any bulky seams in this jacket.
Right. But the other thing it does is it beefs up the cotton a little bit. You know, it's not quite as droopy as it might be because you have these thread seams that are giving it a little bit of support.
Okay, you're going to show us now how to do a few of these techniques.
I am. So this is, of course, your regular 5/8 inch seam. And I've shown you two of the easiest seam finishes. This is a pinked edge. You use your pinking shears. This is a very old-fashioned way. And if you just run one little line of stitching down there, it kind of secures it.
It keeps it from raveling any farther.
That's exactly right. And then this is what we'd call a standard serged edge. This is what we call the industry standard, and it does look very clean and neat. It does. Yes. Then, in this case, this is a serged edge, but the seam has been serged together and pressed to one side. And if you wanted it to look like a faux flat felt, you would just top stitch it. Yes,
yeah,
and you would get the look of a flat felt without having to do that wrap step that is so complicated and difficult.
Yeah, time consuming too.
Right. Now this is a rolled edge serge finish. That's exactly right. Alone. And then here you see it with the seam being sewn and then the rolled edge over top of it.
This is actually what you did on this.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yes. And then you can see how it looks when you open it out. It's just such a fun little decorative statement. That's right. So here in this one nice long seam, we have the step-by-step of a French seam. And a French seam is also a very old-fashioned seam and very beautiful, and particularly beautiful on shears, like organza or something like that.
Because you don't want to be able to see.
Because you don't want to see the seam at all. So you start by making your regular seam, and in this case it was about 1/2 inch. And then you trim it down very small to about 1/8 or 1/4, depending on how ravelly the fabric is. And then you go to your iron and you press it to one side pretty securely. And then you go to the machine and you actually, on the flip side, encase that seam with another row of stitching.
Oh, you're just closing the whole seam.
That's exactly right. So the first, you can't really tell on this linen because it looks the same front or back, but this is actually the front of the fabric. The first seam is on the front. You trim it and then you flip it to the back and put that second line of stitching, and this is what you end up with, and it's really a beautiful seam.
And like you say, especially if you don't want anything to show.
That's exactly right. Yes. A Hong Kong finish you make, and this I've done some straight ones and some curved ones. The first thing you do is you stitch on this bias strip, and you stitch it around. Then you trim it cleanly, flip it around, top stitch, And then if you wanted to actually be bound instead of Hong Kong, you would just fold that underneath. That's exactly right.
Which is what you've done here.
That's right.
Otherwise, you just trim this off.
Yes, right. And here is the same on a straight. This is not a bias piece because it's a straight line. You don't have to do the bias. So you pin that on. I have a little sample here of how you'd start. You pin that strip onto the fabric, and then you'd stitch, and then you press it and turn it. It's really important on these special seam finishes to use your iron as your friend and press so that it lays really nice and flat. The last thing you want on the inside of a garment is a lumpy seam.
And when you've worked so hard on such a beautiful fabric.
Right. So here you see a sample of a Hong Kong finish seam on an open seam, which is really just so pretty. And then I also made you some samples because you can buy this bias tape that's already made. If you're afraid to cut your the bias strips, or you're not, you don't have a fabric you love, you can buy a cotton bias, and then you can, again, you just
encase it.
You just put it on and then trim it and then encase it. And it's a little, you get a very small edge there, but you do get a pretty edge. And then here I did a little sample of a flat film.
Oh,
using
I like
the
flat
bias
fell seam. I just think it's such a pretty finish. Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's really nice to know that we have so many options when we're sewing.
Right.
And it's fun to experiment with different types of seam finishes. Thank you very much, Ray.
Oh, my pleasure.
I'm so happy to have both of you here today, John and Sophia.
Thank you.
And you both know a lot about figs, and I guess we might as well start out, John, by talking about the varieties of figs, just in case someone watching isn't as knowledgeable about it.
Oh, absolutely. A really interesting and fun fact is that they're actually the scion of a plant and sort of an inverted flower.
Even though we call them a fruit, they're really not.
So it's funny, if I take one of these and open that for you, you'll see they're actually a series of little flowers and seeds on the inside. So it's a fruit, certainly to our palate, and it's loaded with great nutrients and flavor and sweetness, but it's actually an inverted flower.
Well, that's an interesting little tidbit.
Yeah. So the dark one here, first of all California product here by all means. This is a California mainstay. We like to say a beautiful state gives beautiful fruit. What we have is our wonderful mission figs. The fresh ones up front there have sort of that plum color to them.
They kind of remind me of plums, actually.
Absolutely. And those create these beautiful dark dried figs. And then those are the Sierra figs up front there. The green, nice and round and full juicy fruit turns into this wonderful golden dried fig, as we call it.
You'd really never know that those were the same ones. Now the mission looks almost the same.
Exactly.
Little more wrinkles.
Yeah, exactly. They're quite different.
Pretty much the same. And you said of the dried, is it 100% are grown in California?
Dried is 100% of the dried figs in the United States are Californian, and about 98% of the fresh. So there are some states like Texas and Virginia that produce beautiful fresh figs, but they don't put them through that sun drying practice that the Californians do.
Kissed with the sun or something like that.
That's right. That's right.
And there are other varieties of figs too. You have these two here today, but there are lots of varieties, and they each have their own unique traits. But can they all be used interchangeably in a recipe or not?
Absolutely. From a textural and a moisture content perspective, they're all very, very similar. So they can be interchanged. But there are some flavor nuances. You know, the beautiful missions here to me have some chocolate flavor notes and some Cabernet wine notes. And then the Goldens have something more like a Riesling or a sweet German wine flavor to them. And those in particular have a little bit more of a meaty texture. So the skin on the outside has a little more bite. So really beautiful in a vegetarian dish that you're looking to add some chew and bite to a dish.
And what I like is, regardless of the variety, you don't peel them.
No.
You eat them as is, and it makes it so much nicer for a snack.
Yeah, and that little tiny stem is about the only thing that you take away, and the entire fruit is completely consumable. Exactly.
And if we have dried fruits or fresh fruits, how do we keep them fresh the longest at home?
Sure. I always say cool, dry place for everything, even your dried. A Ziploc is a really great way to store these because there is still a moisture content to them.
They're kind of sticky.
Yeah, and you want that nice tenderness to them. That signifies a very high quality dried fig when it still has a little bit of give to it.
Oh, is that something if we're shopping for figs, do we slightly squeeze them, the fresh ones?
Well, I think that we're all trained to do that with everything in the produce section.
I think we do.
And I agree. So when someone sees these and they're sort of plump looking and full, you'll know that that's going to be really moist and full and really full of quality flavor as well. And similarly with the fresh figs, when they're a little more firm, those are still great to purchase, but you'll know you want to let them sit for a few days till they soften and a really nice soft, just like a fresh plum or a nectarine. You want it to give a little bit, and you know it's going to be that very juicy, full, ripe flavor.
Ready to go. Well, when you said we were going to do something different in this segment, I never thought about beverages and figs, but that's what we're going to talk about. Both of you are going to share some beverage recipes.
That's right.
So you're going first.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about just the qualities that the figs lend to a beverage, and certainly loads of nutrition. There's a lot of reasons why this first product is something that is very attractive to Americans. We are a smoothie country. And
All
I like
flavors.
Absolutely. And I like to say that it's great for CN, child nutrition, because it's a great way to get kids to really consume the fruits and nuts and things that they might not reach for a snack. And you can sneak in some really great vegetables into smoothies as well. You can add carrots and kale, and you can get them really great nutrition.
That's a good idea.
And in this instance, I have to share a good friend of mine that was born in Israel shared with me. And it's, in this case, we're using the dried mission fig. We're adding walnuts to it, black walnuts. And in this case, he would use dairy, but in this case, I wanted to just create something that was dairy-free, so I used almond milk, which is another really great product in the marketplace, and a little bit of ice. And we blended this very smooth, and I'd love to share a little with you if you'd like to try. So it's very, very robust. You can see, I'm going to pour slowly here so we can catch how rich and creamy that is, and it's getting all of that texture from the nuts and from the figs that are in there. So a nice little sweetness to it, certainly loaded with nutrition, and a great snack. And I think smoothies are also a great vehicle that a lot of young adults will use to load up on protein and get concentrated nutrition when they've got to get to the gym or sustain themselves for the rest of the day if they're on a particular diet and so forth.
No excuse to not have a good, healthy breakfast.
Absolutely.
This is good.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a
and
great
it has
nutrition.
a little texture to it, so you don't just swallow it and head out.
Exactly.
Kind of enjoy it.
Yeah, I think it's asking for you to spend some time with it. Yeah, and that's some of the walnuts that are in there, and certainly the figs have their own particulate to them as well.
And they're sweet. You didn't add extra sugar, did you?
Nothing else sweetening them, just the
That's
figs.
great.
Now, something else that I think is kind of fun, we make a concentrate just by simmering dark figs. We end up with something that we just call our fig juice concentrate.
Oh,
We
that's
just
what
made
this is?
Yeah, we just made that in our test kitchen. But I'm just adding a few ounces of this to a glass. I have a little bit of ice down there to cool it off. But I'm just going to add some sparkling water to that. And I understand sometimes folks
That looks
will...
just like if you're pouring a soft drink.
Exactly. Well, and that's our goal. I think for a lot of reasons, mostly refined sugar. People are avoiding sodas nowadays.
We're trying to.
Yeah. And so this is just really simple. I think we've got a little bit of vanilla in here as well, but it's just our fig juice and some sparkling water, and you've got a nice, refreshing, call it like a cola-like beverage. Super simple to make, and certainly we're
Well,
getting...
I've been trying to eliminate cola, so
Yeah.
I think this is the answer right here.
Sure. Well,
Very good.
Sweetened only from the natural juice of the fig, and no caffeine, obviously. You can make it as complex as you want by adding other spices, but a pretty simple and refreshing drink.
Well, it really is, and I like the fact that we're not adding sugar, we're not adding caffeine, and that is what most people are trying to eliminate in their diets.
Absolutely. And we have a really great segue into something. So I think beverages, because they're just a really remarkable way to get flavor onto the palate. And in a lot of instances, in our historical sort of touch of food or touch of history to food and beverage, the cocktail was a way to excite the appetite and make one really look forward to the meal. So I think a couple things that we're going to see
adult
are some really
beverages
great
here,
beverages.
perhaps? And some non-alcoholic.
So today we're making a beverage using a drinking vinegar, also known as a shrub. And
Drinking vinegar.
and it's a way to preserve fruit using vinegar and sugar, and you simmer your fruit with that. But today we're using only figs and vinegar, utilizing their natural sugar and their
leaving
sweetness.
that sugar out again.
So we have a golden shrub and a red shrub using different types of vinegar, and the Sierra figs for the golden and the Mission for the red. And so we're making 2 cocktails today. The first one we're going to be using bourbon and the red vinegar. So I already have ice in my shaker, and it's great utilizing this because you can make a very simple cocktail with only minimal ingredients, but it will taste complex, very flavorful. So an ounce of the shrub, you can pour that right in.
You didn't know you'd be making cocktails today, did you?
Well, no, but I'm learning a lot today.
And we'll go ahead with 2 ounces of the bourbon.
Well, and
Pour
one
that
thing
right
that
in.
this helps, and Sophia mentioned it, was how simply the cocktail comes together. You know, you go to a restaurant and you see the bartender really kind of going at it with different jars and jiggers. And what's nice here is that your sweetness and your tartness is coming from one thing.
Give it a
So
shake.
we can do this ourselves and we'll know their secrets.
So this one we're going to serve on the rocks. And we're just going to top that with a little ginger ale.
And this style of cocktail, again, it's a very traditional and historic cocktail. This, you can liken yourself to thinking of this as sort of a Manhattan or an old-fashioned, but very contemporary because of what was used to add flavor was the figs.
And you've even used a fig to
A fig for a
embellish
garnish.
it. Garnish it. Okay.
So-
And then the other one you're
The
going to
next
make.
one we're going to use, again, we'll just give this a little flip.
Okay.
2 ounces of the shrub. This one's the
Shrub.
golden shrub.
So golden because we made it with golden figs, correct?
And
Yep.
champagne vinegar. And this one will be paired with gin. Again, 2 ounces, keep it simple.
I always like most recipes if they only have up to 4 ingredients.
And I
Those
think
are
this
my
is
favorite.
very user-friendly for those who want to make more, they're complex cocktails at home, but they're very easy. They're, again, minimal ingredients and not too crazy for one to figure out how to do.
Well, yeah, that's good.
Quick shake. In this one, we're going to serve strain or up. It's a beautiful golden color.
It is.
Here's your garnish.
Thank you. And this one we are going to top with, you could use soda water or sparkling. You could even use champagne or any other bubbles that are your favorite.
Add some additional champagne to it.
And this one, we'll put one
You're
of the
garnishing
Sierras
with the
again.
Sierra.
And ooh, it'll fall in, but
That's where you put them.
yeah. So
Well, that's amazing, and just the speed of it, and like starting the day with the smoothie that's so good for you. Kids would love that.
Sure.
And I was just thinking you could easily put in strawberries or bananas
Absolutely.
or add lots of fruit, and I think fruit is so important for all of us, and it's hard to work in 5 to 6 servings a day, so this makes it a lot easier.
Absolutely.
Thank you both for being with
Thank
us
you.
today.
It's been our pleasure. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the show today. Next time on Creative Living, we'll learn about ingredients and their healing power. We'll talk about how to select fabrics for making quilts and also share some design tips for small space living with an interior decorator. One of my next guests has written a book about some of the popular ingredients in ancient Greek recipes. She explains that their healing and medicinal use in ancient times is still current even today. Her book is titled Cooking and Eating: Wisdom for Better Health. For many people, selecting the right fabrics for quilts is a big hurdle. A quilter on the next show will talk about how to pick fabrics knowing that it will look great when you're finished. She'll go over values and hues, a palette of colors, and show how to use a color wheel with a viewing window to aid in the process. And we'll also talk to an interior designer about some of the challenges of small space living. She'll then present solutions for the overall look of the space. She always considers activities that the space allows, as well as adequate storage. I hope you'll plan to join me next time for Creative Living.
We are very pleased to offer a special booklet that accompanies this series of Creative Living. We are celebrating our 40th year on PBS. This booklet is titled the 40th Anniversary Series, and it features a wonderful collection of ideas and information, and it's available free of charge on our website. Posted as a PDF file, you can simply download the entire booklet or just the segments you're most interested in. For your copy of this commemorative booklet, go to our website at kenw.org and then click on Creative Living. Scroll down to the booklet section and you can click on this booklet or on any of the other booklets we have available online. We would like to invite you to sign up for our free e-newsletter too. Go to kenw.org and click on the Sign Up Now button and input your email address. That's all there is to it. We would also like to ask you to become a fan of Creative Living on Facebook. Go to facebook.com and in the search window type in Creative Living with Sheryl Borden. Thanks so much. We look forward to hearing from you.